Okay, I would like to throw out, I don't know if anyone has a pen here. I guess we could give you pens and paper. I don't know how good everyone's memory is, but I'd like to ask 6 questions and let each of you pick the question you'd like to answer. So each person answer one. If someone would like to comment on someone else, that's fine. But I'd like to throw out 6 questions, and then please comment on whichever one you are most drawn to. And if you want to raise your hand, if you want a pen and paper, we'll get someone to get it to you.
Can we assign somebody to remember one question and have 6?
Just get a pen and paper. Okay, here are the 6 questions. First question. Michael Moss, author of Salt, Sugar, Fat, said that every major U.S. food company designs food we can't stop eating. Please explain this. Question 2. There was a study from March 4th, 2014 by Selma Tassel Morgan Levine that showed animal protein caused a 75% increase in death and a 400% increase in cancer over an 18-year follow-up. And these findings were not, okay, with the 18-year follow-up, and please explain this. That was the second question. Third question, explain what the EPIC Oxford Health study was and what its conclusions were, and was this an important study? Fourth question, should we eat bone broth? Fifth question, in the 1950s, why were there 10 times more people in Loma Linda, California who lived to over 100 than there were in Los Angeles? And 6, is it true that the egg industry sponsored 92% of this egg studies since 1990? Let me quickly repeat this. The first question was Michael Moss saying that the major U.S. food companies designed food that we can't stop eating. Please explain it. The second one was Selma Tassel's Morgan Levine's study showing that animal protein caused a 75% increase in death and 400% increase in cancer over an 18-year follow-up. The third is explain what the EPIC Oxford Health study was and what its conclusions were. The fourth was, should we eat bone broth? The fifth was, why were there 10 times more people in Loma Linda who lived to over 100 than Los Angeles? And the sixth was, is it true that the egg industry sponsored 92% of the egg studies since 1990? As a goal, we would try to answer each of these questions in 3 minutes or less. And whoever wants to go, just hit the button, talk, and then...
I don't know whether you want us to go in order. I'll do question 1.
Okay, whatever you...
You on 2. All right. Question 1, Michael Moss. So quickly, Moss is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. Wrote Salt, Sugar, Fat, came out, I believe, in 2013, thereabouts. Has since written another book, Hooked. And Salt, Sugar, Fat was excerpted in a New York Times Magazine cover story entitled The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. So you can just Google that, get the whole article, get it, read it. But the interesting thing about Moss telling us how the food supply is willfully engineered to be addictive is that he was not the first. Almost 10 years earlier, there was a 4-part expose in the Chicago Tribune entitled Obesity, the Oreo, and Us. The 4th entry in the 4-part expose was, where there's smoke, there may be food research too. That story was that 3 million pages of documents were acquired under subpoena by the state attorneys general in a class action lawsuit against Big Tobacco. What these investigative journalists were surprised to discover was documentation that had previously been proprietary, showing that the holding company, Altria, was parent to both Kraft and Philip Morris, and that Kraft scientists and Philip Morris scientists had been given marching orders to work together. Here's the functional MRI machine, you both use it. On the Philip Morris side, we want you to figure out what to put into cigarettes to get young people hooked. And on the Kraft side, we want you to figure out what to put into food so people can't stop eating what we sell them until their arm gets tired from lifting it to their mouths. 4-part expose, Chicago Tribune. 10 years later, Michael Moss, Pulitzer Prize in tow, tells us the same story again. Every major food company, U.S. around the world, has teams of scientists, functional MRI machines, and marching orders to design food people can't stop eating because it lights up the appetite center and the hypothalamus like a Christmas tree, and we health professionals are busy preaching portion control. So first of all, you should be outraged Where is the outrage, right? I mean, we've been told it's hiding in plain sight. Your food supply is willfully engineered to make you fat and diabetic for the sake of corporate profit. Where the hell is the outrage? But secondly, there's a very simple remedy. Eat whole foods. They can't muck around with whole foods.
Hit the button, hit the button.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll take bone broth for $100. Sorry, we didn't get instructions on the button. Yeah, I grew up in a home where chicken soup was fairly holy. There is, I'm aware, somewhere in the medical literature, a short study that suggests if you have a viral illness, chicken soup may shorten the duration of it. I would argue it's probably the carrots and the parsnip, but we don't have much. Then bone broth, for reasons I'm not completely clear, has screamed into the integrative medicine, functional medicine, naturopathic world. And as you know from any vitamin or health food store, there's rows and rows of turmeric bone broth. They're all dried powders, cacao bone broth. You know, the natural inclination is to go to the medical literature, and at least 3 months ago, last time I looked, there remained a single article. It was chicken bone broth. You can also do it organic from marrow. And the only thing they reported was that the lead content of the broth was very high because we all store lead in our bones, and if we cook them long enough, whether they be human, I don't suggest, calf, cow, chicken, and such, it will apparently release lead. Now, all the companies claim they test and that they can verify. I don't know if all the companies, but some of the companies actually are aware of the article and verify it. Beyond that therapeutic, it's testimonial, and you don't throw out testimonial, but you ask, what's the mechanism? I mean, collagen is created in the body. Linus Pauling taught us from vitamin C and lysine. We get vitamin C and lysine from whole fruits and vegetables. We can make collagen on plant diets, maybe make it more efficiently on plant diets. And whatever collagen is in the bone broth has to be broken down by enzymes into their more constituent parts to be absorbed. Then the body's going to use those parts for whatever it's needed. It isn't like it's earmarked, goes right back to your skin and takes your wrinkles away. It's not quite that nanobot right to your forehead or some such thing. You know, Botox broth might be a better idea. So I'm skeptical. On the other hand, you can make amazing vegetable mirepoix. I'm stealing a wife of David Katz term, Catherine Katz and such. But you can make beautiful broths from vegetables. I think I'd recommend that highly to any of my patients. It's just one of those things. It's a huge industry. You know, people talk about, just to discuss you, tail to snout use of animals. Part of it is there's higher glycine in the hoofs, if I'm going to make you all get nauseated and throw up. But apparently you might actually access some more nutrients to improve your collagen internally with that approach. But I'll eat from the beginning to the end of the carrot without reservation, but not the pig or the cow. But I say no, it's bogus.
I guess since we're at this end of the table, I'll take the Epic Oxford question. Epic Oxford...
keep about 6 inches from the mic.
Yeah, Epic Oxford was a study out of the UK that followed about 65,000 individuals, recruited them between 1993 and 1999, I believe. And these were all relatively health-conscious individuals, comparing meat eaters with semi-vegetarians, with pesco-vegetarians, with lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and vegans. And what this study essentially did, they were controlling, these were all health-conscious individuals, they were controlling for how much people smoke, how much alcohol they drink, how much they exercise, to make it a very, very fair comparison. And then they followed these individuals and are still following these individuals, so have been following them for many years to see who develops what diseases. And one thing that I need to say is the vegetarians in this particular cohort, I don't think we're eating really a whole food, plant-based diet. They weren't terribly conscious about their B12 intakes, not terribly conscious about iodine intakes. So I don't think it was an ideal plant-based diet for the plant-exclusive or vegan participants in this study. But what the study has found is that generally the vegetarians and particularly the vegans are the leanest of all dietary categories, that the vegans had about 40% fewer cataracts, the vegetarians about 30% fewer than similar health-conscious meat eaters. They had less heart disease, around 30% less, depending on which of their studies you look at. They had about the vegans had about 19% less cancer, lacto-ovo-vegetarians not quite so much. And then they also had less diabetes. This is a new study from 2019 following Epic Oxford. I think it was 43% lower diabetes. And no, I think it was 30. I just looked at it this morning for the first time. I didn't know it existed prior to that. So, but what was interesting is the pesco vegetarians actually had lower risk of diabetes in this particular study than the vegans, and that wasn't the case for heart disease. The pesco vegetarians weren't at any advantage over the non-vegetarians for heart disease. I could go on. Diverticular disease was 72% lower among the vegans. It was 27% lower among the lacto-ovo-vegetarians compared to similar health-conscious meat eaters. And so I think that this was an important study. It has, I think it's very similar to the Adventist Health study too, which gives us a good indication of the potential advantage of plant-based diets compared to omnivorous diets.
I could tackle, I guess, the Adventist Health to climb on that, because the Epic Oxford did have some distinct differences with the Adventist Health, and it's been mentioned in several of the review studies because they did have B12 deficiencies that caused homocysteine deficiencies that probably affected their heart disease. And you got to understand when they do, I mentioned some of this in my talk, but when they do these studies and you hear them say control for, one of the advantages of a plant-based diet is that we are leaner, as was mentioned, but they control for that. So in other words, there was a part of the EPIC study that showed that they had less colon cancer, but they controlled for weight, and then there wasn't a difference because weight's an independent factor. So you got to keep these things in mind. The interesting thing about the Adventist Health, so what was the question? Why in LA do people die at an earlier age than Loma Linda?
In the 1950s, why were there 10 times more people in Loma Linda, California who lived to over 100 than there were in Los Angeles? Right,
so this was where we first started understanding about the Adventist Health group, or the Adventists in general, or Adventists in general, as it's supposed to be said. At that time, that study was all about smoking. They noticed that the Adventists, any Adventists out there? None? Oh, we got a few, there we go. Oh, yeah, hey. Well, don't let me tell you what your religion says, but the general idea is that your body's the temple of the soul, right? And so that you should treat it appropriately. It's a vessel of God, and therefore you don't smoke. And so the original Adventist studies were a look at the difference between smoking and not smoking. But the interesting thing is they started saying, well, this is such a healthy group of people. What else could we learn from them? And that's where the Adventist 1 and then Adventist 2 health studies came, where they actually did prospective studies of these people. It was a prospective registry where they then started doing studies, looking at the data. And then they started separating people between light meat eaters versus vegetarian versus pescatarian versus vegan, and once again, similar to the EPIC, but even stronger, there was an advantage to plant-based diets, which may be another reason it wasn't just the smoking, it was also the plant-based diets that made them live longer.
Okay, my question is to address the finding that over an 18-year period, people who ate the most animal protein had a 75% increase in total mortality, so that's death from any cause, which would include driving into a telephone pole while texting, and a 4-fold increase in cancer. So what can we conclude from that? Well, let me approach this question from a different direction. If I put up a picture of a cow, a horse, and an elephant and ask you what's their natural diet, you would all say plants. Then I would ask you what time in their life do they eat animal protein? Some of you would say never. Others of you, after thinking a bit, would say, oh, when they're babies, when they're nursing. And that's the point. For plant-based species, animal protein is a growth stimulant and a growth signal. It turns on a suite of growth genes called TOR genes that actively tell your cells to try and grow and multiply and enlarge. That's wonderful if you're a baby. If you're an adult, it's a terrible thing because your cells should be quiet. They shouldn't be trying to grow. And so what ends up happening is they turn into tumors over time, hence the increase in cancer. But it also causes metabolic dysregulation, which can ultimately result in higher levels of inflammation, which will lead to heart disease, diabetes, and a host of other problems, and actually make you stupid enough to text while driving. So the bottom line is, and the other points about this is that if you're eating a lot of animal flesh, it's displacing healthier things from your diet, such as fruits, vegetables, grain, whole grains, and also fiber. And why is fiber important? Because we now understand with the gut-brain connection that a healthy microbiome is critically important to having a healthy mind and to lowering your risk of depression, anxiety, and a host of other problems. So the sum total is that if you have an animal food-based diet, you're gonna die. And you're gonna die, I mean, we're all gonna die, but you're gonna die sooner. And you might die in a lot of pain from an avoidable cancer.
Okay, my question had to do with the egg studies after 1990. And basically, the first thing I'll say is the agricultural groups in our country are very wealthy. And they have great business partners at the federal government. And that's part of our problem in this country. We don't have regulators and companies and industries that are regulated. We have business partners who join forces with agriculture and drug companies and that sort of thing to do their bidding, essentially. So anyway, to get to the point, the federal government every once in a while assesses what it's investing research dollars in. And two issues that have pretty much been decided at one point in time are smoking. I mean, we pretty much know smoking's not good for you, and spending a lot more federal dollars and researching it is useless because I don't think we're going to come up with some study that says it's great, right? And the other one was cholesterol, that there's a direct relationship between dietary cholesterol, plasma cholesterol, direct relationship between plasma cholesterol levels and cardiovascular disease and coronary artery disease. So the Fed stopped investing money in research, and that gave the Egg Board a very good opportunity to take advantage of that gap. So they started funding research. And study design is really important, and it's something that you have to look at because you can design a study to show almost anything you want it to show if you do it right. And so what some of the egg studies did was they took people who were eating already a high cholesterol diet. And there's such a thing as cholesterol saturation, where added cholesterol in the diet's not going to so much increase your plasma cholesterol anymore. And then they added eggs to these people's diet, and lo and behold, their cholesterol didn't go up. And they reported that eating eggs didn't increase your plasma cholesterol. Well, then what they did is a meta-analysis of studies, and they used the cutoff point the year that they started funding studies. So the inclusion criteria guaranteed that the meta-analyses would show that you could safely eat eggs, lots of them actually, and you wouldn't have to worry about plasma cholesterol. And so that's just one of the ways in which agricultural groups misbehave in terms of twisting the evidence to make people think that foods that aren't safe actually are safe to eat just in almost unlimited quantity if you choose to.